We've said several times that negotiation can give to the transferee more rights than the transferor had. And that's going to be the focus of this topic on the holder in due course. Now, we mentioned before that negotiable instruments are meant to be readily transferable, that they're meant to be able to be transferred and used just like cash would be. And so today we're going to learn about a doctrine that helps to ensure that negotiable instruments can be transferred. Now, problems arise when there is a defense to payment, when a defense to payment exists. When the maker of a note or the drawer of a draft has a defense to actual payment of the amount referenced in the negotiable instrument. So what do we do when that happens? Well, a holder in due course may have more rights than an ordinary holder. Now remember, one becomes a holder through the use of the process called negotiation. A holder may in fact be a holder in due course, and it turns out that a holder in due course may be able to collect an instrument easier than the original payee. That it may be easier for a subsequent purchaser of the instrument to collect rather than the original payee on the note. So today we're going to look at the difference between a holder and a holder in due course. And after this lecture, you should be able to answer the following questions. First of all, what is a holder in due course? What special rights does a holder in due course have under the law? And how does one become a holder in due course? And then finally, the shelter principle. What is the shelter principle? Now, we know that a holder in due course has special rights under the law. A transfer of an instrument by negotiation makes the person who receives it a holder. And remember, negotiation is different from common law transfer. For common law transfer, the transferee becomes the assignee. He does not become a holder under the law. So negotiation is different from common law transfer in that the transferee may in fact have more rights than the transferor. Now, negotiation is a specific type of transfer, and there are two methods of negotiating an instrument so that the recipient becomes a holder. An ordered instrument, remember, is negotiated by endorsement and delivery, signing on the back and then delivery. And a bearer instrument is negotiated by simple delivery, by transferring the instrument from one party to the next. Now, an ordinary holder has the status of an assignee of a contract right, meaning that holder obtains only those rights that the transferor had in the instrument. The UCC defines a holder as a person in possession of an instrument if the instrument is payable to bearer, or in the cases of an instrument payable to an identified person, if the identified person is in possession. An ordinary holder is only going to obtain those rights that the transferor had in the instrument, and therefore their status is the same as a common law assignee. And a holder is normally subject to the same defenses, just as an assignee would. So any defense that could be asserted against the transferor can be asserted against the subsequent holder of the document. Things like fraud or failure to honor a check. A holder is ordinarily subject to those same defenses. A holder in due course, however, which we often abbreviate HDC, takes an instrument free of most defenses against payment on it or claims to it. Now, there are two preliminary requirements to be a holder in due course. How do we become a holder in due course? Because that's what every holder wants to be, right? A holder in due course takes the instrument free of any claims against it. So we start with this idea the instrument must be negotiable. It must meet those standards of negotiability that we discussed before. If it's not negotiable, then it is impossible to make the transferee a holder in due course. Furthermore, whoever seeks holder in due course status must first be a holder. So the party must be a holder in order to assert that it is a holder in due course. Now, holder must meet three requirements to become a holder in due course. How does he become a holder in due course? A holder in due course must acquire the negotiable instrument for value in good faith and without notice of irregularity. So these three elements, value, good faith, and without notice of irregularity. Let's look at each of those three requirements in a little bit more detail. Again, a holder in due course must meet these certain requirements, these three requirements. Value, in good faith, and without notice. Let's start with value. A holder takes an instrument for value by performing the promise for which the instrument was issued or transferred, or acquiring a security interest or other lien in the instrument, some other claim on the instrument, taking an instrument in payment of or as security for an antecedent debt, or giving a negotiable instrument as payment, or giving an irrevocable commitment as payment. You may be remembering consideration, and if you remember consideration from the study of contracts, consideration has to be minimal. There's very little required in order to constitute consideration. The requirement for value is different. There must be actually something of value that is transferred from one party to the other. And that may be payment of money. It may be giving another negotiable instrument as payment, or giving an irrevocable commitment as payment. So on your test, just look to make sure that there was some value given for the instrument. Now, this is going to eliminate any instruments that were taken by inheritance, because when you inherit things, you don't actually give money for that. That's free for you. It's going to eliminate gifts. So if your grandfather decides to give to you a promissory note that he obtained from someone else, you cannot be a holder in due course because you did not give value for that instrument. So things like gift, or what we call bequest, which is when it comes in an inheritance, if the party takes it by those means, then that party has not given value and therefore cannot be a holder in due course. Good faith. What is good faith? Well, good faith defines it, again, as honesty in fact and the observance of reasonable commercial standards for fair dealing, if in fact it's a merchant. And what this means essentially is that the holder must have acted honestly in acquiring the instrument. In acquiring the instrument, the holder did so in an honest manner, meaning he acquired the instrument in the ordinary course of business, or he acquired the instrument without being put on notice that someone was not acting in good faith. So we look to see how was the negotiable instrument obtained. If there are circumstances that look as if it was in fact obtained fraudulently, then even if the holder claims to have no knowledge of the initial fraud, it cannot assert that it acted in good faith. It's not important whether the transferor acted in good faith. We're only concerned with whether the transferee, the alleged purported holder in due course, whether they acted in good faith. The UCC doesn't give us clear guidelines to determine good faith, so in fact each situation is going to be examined separately. And finally, without notice of irregularity. Without notice of irregularity means that the holder must acquire the instrument without notice that it's overdue or has previously been dishonored, is subject to a valid claim or defense by any person. If a transferee learns of a valid claim or defense prior to the transfer, the transferee cannot be a holder in due course because they cannot claim to have taken it without notice of any irregularity. Contains alterations or unauthorized signatures, or is so irregular or incomplete as to call into question its authenticity. So when does a holder have notice of a defect? How do we know that a holder has notice? Well, the holder has a notice of a defect whenever she has either actual knowledge of the defect or received a notice of the defect or has reason to know that a defect exists. In any of those situations, the holder would be stopped from asserting holder in due course status because they cannot claim that they took it without notice of irregularity. Now, knowledge of claims or defenses may be imputed to the holder if they are apparent on the face of the instrument or the holder had any other reason to know them from the facts surrounding her purchase of it. So on your test, just look to see, was there some claim or defense that the holder reasonably should have been aware of or was actually aware of. The holder must also have received the notice at a time and in a manner that gives a reasonable opportunity to act on it. So there is some limitation there. Now there are several items that will make an instrument defective. We said that overdue instruments are defective. If the time has passed for payment or an unreasonable length of time has passed after its issue, then it is no longer a valid instrument. So a demand instrument's overdue if an unreasonable length of time has passed after its issue. Now this refers to checks. Say you found a check that your grandfather sent you on your 7th birthday. You're now 20 years old and you go down to the bank to cash the check. That check is defective. Why? Because an unreasonable length of time has passed since it was issued. Now the standard is 6 months for banks, but in cases not involving banks, we just look at the question of reasonableness. A time instrument, an instrument that's payable on a certain date and time, is overdue after the due date shown on its face. So if a holder takes an instrument knowing that the instrument is overdue, then the holder may not be able to assert a claim against the original maker of the note or drawer of the draft. A series of notes with successive maturity dates is overdue when any note in the series is overdue. A dishonored instrument is defective. An instrument is dishonored when the party to which the instrument is presented refuses to pay it. So a holder who takes an instrument with notice that a party to whom the instrument was presented refused to pay it cannot claim holder in due course status. A holder who takes an instrument with actual or constructive notice, meaning you should have known, that a party to whom the instrument was presented cannot claim to be an HDC. Thus, a person who takes a check that is stamped insufficient funds is put on notice that there may be a defense against that collection of that check. An incomplete instrument is defective. A purchaser may not become an holder in due course, an HDC, of a facially incomplete instrument if there is elements lacking on the instrument. For example, the amount is not filled in, then you cannot claim to be a holder in due course where there are serious questions lacking. Minor omissions may be permissible, such as a date. Remember, we said that the lack of a date doesn't invalidate an instrument, but any sort of material omission is going to be incomplete, and therefore the person who takes the instrument cannot take it as an HDC. If the person accepts an interest that has been completed later, then that person can take it as an HDC because that person saw a completed instrument. Irregularities can make an instrument defective. Any sort of irregularity on the face of the instrument can prevent HDC status. Any irregularity on the face of the instrument calls into question its validity or its ownership. If it creates ambiguity, for instance, as to which party to pay. Voidable obligations may make an instrument defective. A party cannot be an HDC, a holder in due course, if he knows that a party to the instrument has a defense. For example, a potential purchaser who knows that the maker of a note has breached the underlying contract with the payee cannot therefore purchase the note as an HDC. Knowledge of one defense precludes a holder from asserting holder in due course status in regard to all defenses. So, for example, if a party takes a note that he knows has a forged endorsement and then presents it to the maker for payment, the maker refuses to pay the ground because of breach of the underlying contract, the purchaser cannot be an HDC because she knew of one potential defense to payment of that claim. Now, finally, we talk about the shelter principle. The shelter principle gives expanded holder in due course protection. And what the shelter principle says is that a person who derives her title through an HDC, through a holder in due course, can acquire the rights and privileges of an HDC. Thus, a person who does not qualify as a holder in due course may still be able to assert the rights and privileges of a holder in due course. Anyone who can trace her title to a negotiable instrument back to an HDC has the rights of an HDC, even if that person would otherwise not qualify for holder in due course status. For instance, if a person inherited a banknote, that person ordinarily cannot be an HDC. They did not give value. If, however, the note was originally obtained from a holder in due course prior to its bequest, then the shelter principle gives to the subsequent transferee the right to assert holder in due course status. Anyone who can trace her title to a negotiable instrument back to an HDC has the rights of an HDC. Now, the shelter principle is based on contract law, and it states that the former owner must not have either been a party to fraud or illegal activity affecting the instrument, or had notice of a claim or defense against the instrument. So the shelter principle will not apply if the party asserting HDC status had notice of a claim or defense against the instrument, or had been a party to fraud or illegal activity affecting the instrument. A person who previously held the instrument may not improve his position by later acquiring. So if a person takes a note as a holder and then subsequently transfers it to a holder in due course, that person cannot then go reacquire the instrument and rely on the shelter principle to give them holder in due course status. You cannot improve your position by later reacquiring the note. So in conclusion, what did we learn today? A holder in due course has special rights under the law. A holder in due course must acquire the instrument for value in good faith and without notice, and a number of items can make an instrument defective. And finally, the shelter principle expands holder in due course protection.